Commander Velnash stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the blue-green planet rotate slowly on the main screen. Kepler 442b looked peaceful from space. White clouds drifted over oceans and continents. It reminded him of the garden worlds back home in the Etherian Collective. "Sir, the human colony has not responded to our messages," his communication officer said. The officer's forearms moved nervously across his console. Velnash nodded his elongated head. "They are a young species. Perhaps their technology cannot receive our signals yet." The Etherian Collective had been traveling the stars for 10,000 years. They had met many species. Most were friendly. Some needed time to understand. But all eventually joined the Collective or agreed to peaceful borders. Real war, had been forgotten by civilized species long ago. "Deploy the peacekeeping forces," Velnash ordered. "Standard first contact protocol. We will show them we mean no harm." 20 silver ships descended toward the planet's surface. Each one was beautiful, with curved lines and gentle blue lights. The Etherians had designed them to look non-threatening. Inside each ship, 50 peacekeepers checked their equipment. They carried stun weapons and shield generators. Nothing that could cause permanent harm. The ships landed in an empty field near the human colony. The colony itself was small, maybe 30,000 humans living in metal and concrete buildings. Smoke rose from what looked like primitive factories. Ground vehicles moved on wheels instead of anti-gravity systems. Captain Torvin led the first group of peacekeepers toward the colony. His tall, thin body moved gracefully across the rough ground. His silver uniform caught the morning sunlight. Behind him, his team spread out in the standard greeting formation. "Remember," Torvin said through the communication link, "humans are new to space travel. They may be frightened. Keep your weapons powered down." They had walked halfway to the colony when the first human vehicles appeared. These were not civilian transports. They were angular, painted in strange patterns of green and brown, and had long tubes pointing forward. "Weapons," one of Torvin's soldiers said. "Those are projectile weapons." Torvin raised his forehands in what he hoped humans would understand as a peaceful gesture. "We come in peace," he said through his translator device broadcasting on all frequencies. The human vehicle stopped. Figures emerged, but they did not look like the humans in the Collective's database. These humans wore heavy armor and helmets. Their faces were hidden. They carried black metal objects that looked crude but dangerous. A human voice crackled over the radio. "This is Colonel Martinez of the Earth Defense Force. You are trespassing on human territory. Leave immediately." Torvin was surprised. No species had ever rejected first contact so quickly. "We are the Etherian Collective. We come as friends. We wish to..." The human fired his weapon. The sound was shocking, a sharp crack that echoed across the field. The bullet struck Torvin's shield and stopped, floating in the energy field. "Warning shot," another human voice said. "The next one won't be." Torvin looked at his team. They were all frozen in shock. In 10,000 years, no one had fired on an Etherian peacekeeper during first contact. "Perhaps we should demonstrate our capabilities," Torvin said. He turned to face a nearby mountain, empty of life according to his scanners. "Observe. We mean no harm, but we are not defenseless." He touched a control on his belt. A beam of pure energy shot from his ship, striking the mountain. The entire top of the mountain vanished, turned to dust in an instant. Where once stood 1,000 feet of rock, now there was only a flat surface still glowing red. "That was a warning," Torvin said. "We do not wish to fight. Please let us talk." The humans were quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Colonel Martinez spoke again, and his voice was different. Colder. "All units code black. Repeat, code black." What happened next would haunt Velnash for the rest of his life. The human colony exploded. Not from an attack, but from within. The humans had destroyed their own buildings. Smoke and fire rose into the sky. Velnash watched his sensors in horror as life signs vanished by the hundreds. "They're killing their own people," his sensor officer cried. "No," the tactical officer said, his voice shaking. "They're evacuating underground. But they're destroying everything on the surface. Every building, every piece of equipment. They're denying us resources." Then the civilian ships launched. Velnash had seen them on the sensors earlier, cargo vessels and transports. But they weren't evacuating. They were accelerating toward the Etherian ships in orbit, their engines burning at dangerous levels. "Sir, those ships are on collision courses." "They wouldn't," Velnash said. There are people on those ships, civilians, but they would. And they did. The first cargo ship slammed into the Etherean cruiser Gentle Light at 3% of light speed. The cruiser's shields held but barely. The second ship hit moments later. Then the third. They're using their own ships as weapons. The tactical officer's voice cracked with disbelief. There were people on those ships. They just died to damage us. On the planet's surface, things got worse. The human soldiers opened fire with everything they had. Not energy weapons or stun beams, but crude chemical explosives and metal projectiles. They threw canisters that released green gas. When the gas touched an Etherean peacekeeper who had lowered his shield to show peaceful intent, the soldier began screaming. His skin bubbled and burned. Chemical weapons, the medical officer said, his voice hollow. They're using chemical weapons. Those have been banned by every civilized species for 5,000 years. Torvin's team was retreating now, but the humans followed, and that was when Velnash saw something that made him question everything he knew about intelligent life. A human soldier took a direct hit from a stun beam. It should have knocked him unconscious instantly. Instead, he kept moving. Blood poured from his nose and ears. His left arm hung useless at his side, but he kept shooting. He walked forward even as his body failed, firing until he collapsed. And even then, even as he died, he pulled a pin from something on his belt. The explosion killed 2 Etherean peacekeepers who had moved to help him. He turned himself into a weapon, Torvin reported, his voice shaking. He was dying and he made sure to take us with him. More reports came in. Human soldiers with missing limbs continuing to fight. Humans injecting themselves with combat drugs that would kill them in hours. But let them keep fighting now. A human medic using a knife to remove shrapnel from another soldier's chest with no pain medication, and the soldier never stopped shooting. Pull back, Velnash ordered. All forces pull back immediately. But the humans didn't let them retreat peacefully. They followed, using weapons that seemed designed not just to kill but to cause fear. Weapons that burned, weapons that made sounds that hurt Etherean hearing organs. They painted messages on their vehicles and what the translator said was blood. One human broadcast stayed on repeat. You wanted to see what humans are like in war. This is what we are. Leave, or we'll show you more. As his forces retreated to their ships, Velnash received one final report that chilled him. The humans had children in their underground bunkers. Families. They had brought their offspring to a colony world on the edge of space. And when threatened, their response was not to protect those children by surrendering. Their response was to become monsters so terrible that no enemy would dare threaten those children again. The Etherean ships lifted off, leaving the burning colony behind. Velnash stood at his bridge watching the tactical display. In just 1 hour, the humans had shown him warfare unlike anything in the collective's history. They had turned their own colony into a weapon. They had used suicide attacks. They had deployed chemical weapons banned for millennia, and the worst part was the communication they received as they reached orbit. It was from Colonel Martinez. This was us being nice, he said. We could have started with nukes. Next time we will. Velnash turned to his crew. Many were shaking. Some were crying, tears flowing from their large eyes. They had trained for peacekeeping, for helping species join the galactic community. They had never trained for this. Sir, his second-in-command asked, what are we dealing with? Velnash looked at the planet below where fires still burned. I don't know, he admitted. But I fear we have awakened something that should have been left alone. Velnash sat in his quarters, surrounded by floating displays showing human history. He had been studying for 3 days without rest. His 4 eyes were strained, and his normally silver skin had turned a dull gray from stress. Each new piece of information made him feel sick. Computer, he said, show me more about these Geneva Conventions. The screen filled with text. Rules for war. The humans had made rules for war because they needed to limit themselves. The thought made Velnash's secondary heart skip a beat. The rules said no chemical weapons, but the humans had used them on Kepler 442b. The rules said to treat prisoners well, but he had watched humans execute their own wounded, rather than let them be captured. The rules said to protect civilians, but they had turned civilian ships into weapons. They call them the Geneva Suggestions, his research officer, Caleth, said from the doorway. I found it in their military forums. They have rules, but when survival is at stake, they ignore them. Caleth entered the room and placed a datapad on the desk. His hands shook slightly. Sir, I've been researching as you asked. I think you need to see this. The datapad showed images from something called World War II. Cities turned to ash in seconds by atomic weapons. Soldiers using flamethrowers to burn other soldiers alive. Death camps where millions died. Cities firebombed until nothing remained but melted glass and charred bones. This was just one of their wars, Keleth said. They've had thousands. They fight over resources. They fight over ideas. They fight over which imaginary deity is correct. Sometimes they fight just because someone insulted someone else. Velnash picked up another datapad. This one showed World War I. Soldiers living in muddy trenches. Chemical weapons that burned lungs. Machine guns cutting down thousands in minutes. Something called artillery that rained death from miles away. Look at this, Velnash said, pointing to a section about something called the Christmas truce. In the middle of killing each other, they stopped to celebrate a holiday together. They played games. They sang songs. Then the next day they went back to killing each other. How is that possible? Keleth asked. I don't know, but it gets worse. Velnash pulled up another file. They've used biological warfare. Giving blankets infected with disease to enemies. Poisoning water supplies. They've even researched how to weaponize their own planet's weather. A soft chime indicated someone at the door. It was Commander Torvin, the officer who had led the ground team. He looked terrible. His eyes were dull and he moved slowly, like each step hurt. Sir, Torvin said, 3 of my soldiers have requested transfer to non-combat duties. They can't sleep. They keep seeing that human soldier who turned himself into a bomb. Granted, Velnash said immediately. How are you doing? Torvin was quiet for a moment. I've been in the collective military for 200 years. I've seen disputes. I've seen disagreements that needed intervention. But I've never seen anything like the humans. They didn't just try to defeat us. They tried to traumatize us. Keleth pulled up another file. It's part of their strategy. They call it psychological warfare, making the enemy too afraid to fight. They have specialists who study how to break their enemies' minds. Velnash felt sick. Show me their current military doctrine. The screen filled with information about something called total war. When humans fought seriously, they didn't just attack military targets. They destroyed everything. Factories, farms, roads, bridges, power plants. They removed their enemy's ability to fight by removing their ability to exist. Sir, Keleth said, reading from his pad. In their Second World War, they had something called the Manhattan Project. They spent billions of units of currency to build a weapon that could destroy entire cities. And when they had it, they used it twice on cities full of civilians. Why? Torvin asked. Why would they do that? Velnash had found the answer in his research. They calculated it would save lives. They estimated that invading would cost millions of deaths on both sides. So they killed hundreds of thousands to save millions. It's horrible logic, but it's still logic. The room was quiet as they processed this. There's more, Keleth said reluctantly. They have concepts we don't have words for. Mutually assured destruction. Building weapons so terrible that using them means everyone dies and calling that peace. Scorched earth. Destroying their own territory so enemies can't use it. Guerrilla warfare. Civilians becoming soldiers without warning. Velnash pulled up a video file. Watch this. It's from their training programs. The video showed human soldiers training, but it wasn't just physical training. They were being exposed to horrible sounds, terrible smells, disturbing images. They were being hurt deliberately. Sleep-deprived, starved, made to hurt each other. They traumatized their own soldiers, Torvin said in disbelief. They hurt them in training so they won't break in real combat. It gets worse, Velnash said. He showed them something called SEER training. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. They taught their soldiers how to survive torture. They tortured their own people to teach them to resist torture. I need to sit down, Torvin said, slumping into a chair. Keleth was reading from his pad again. They have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. They've been preparing for war their entire history. Every generation fights. Every generation gets better at killing. And look at their entertainment, Velnash added, showing them something called video games. They simulate war for fun. Their children play at killing. They've turned violence into an art form. The door chimed again. It was the medical officer, Dr. Yellen. She looked exhausted. Sir, I've been treating the soldiers exposed to the chemical weapons. I've also been analyzing what they used on us. She placed a sample container on the desk. This is mustard gas. It's one of their oldest chemical weapons. Over 100 Earth years old. They could have used nerve agents that kill in seconds. They could have used biological weapons that would have infected our ships. They used an antique to make a point. What point? Torvin asked. That they were holding back, Velnash said quietly. They wanted us to know they could have been worse. Dr. Yellen nodded. I've been researching their medical procedures too. They cut into their own bodies to fix problems. They replace organs. They've even researched how to keep severed heads alive. Their medicine is as violent as their warfare. Because they needed violent medicine to treat violent injuries, Caleth said. They've been practicing trauma surgery for thousands of years because they've been traumatizing each other for thousands of years. Velnash stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among those stars was Earth, the human homeworld, a planet that had seen more war than any world in the collective's history. I found their military academy's reading lists, he said. They study war like we study peace. They have thousands of books on strategy and tactics. They've turned killing into a science. They have mathematical formulas for acceptable casualty rates. Acceptable casualties, Torvin repeated. They plan to lose people. They expect it worse, Velnash said. They have something called the trolley problem, a thought experiment about sacrificing some to save others. Their children learn this. They teach their young to think about who should die. The room fell silent again. Each of them was processing the horror of what they were learning. Finally, Caleth spoke. Sir, what do we tell the High Council? Velnash turned from the window. The truth. That we've encountered a species that has been practicing war since before they could write. A species that has turned violence into science, art, and entertainment. A species that creates rules for war not because they respect life, but because without rules they would destroy everything, including themselves. The Council won't believe it, Torvin said. Then we'll show them the evidence. Every war, every weapon, every atrocity. We'll show them that humans don't just kill their enemies. They've industrialized death. They've made it efficient. Dr. Yellen stood to leave, then paused. Sir, there's one more thing. I've been studying their biology. They're persistence predators. Their ancestors would chase prey for hours until it died of exhaustion. They're built to never give up. That's why that soldier kept fighting even while dying. It's in their DNA. After she left, Velnash looked at his remaining officers. Continue researching. We need to understand them if we're going to survive them. As Caleth and Torvin left, Velnash turned back to his screens. A new file had appeared. Something about a human concept called deterrence through superior firepower. He began to read, and with each word, his dread grew deeper. The Etherian High Council's response came faster than Velnash expected. 12 of the most advanced ships in the Collective's fleet appeared around Kepler 442b, along with something that hadn't been used in 3,000 years, a pacification dreadnought. Admiral Sethrin commanded the fleet from the dreadnought's bridge. His ancient eyes had seen the Collective bring peace to hundreds of species. He looked at Velnash with something between pity and disappointment. Commander, your reports were disturbing, Sethrin said. The Council believes you may have misunderstood the situation. No species could be as violent as you describe and still achieve spaceflight. They would have destroyed themselves. Velnash wanted to argue, but he knew it would be useless. The Council hadn't seen what he had seen. They hadn't watched humans use their own bodies as weapons. The Council has authorized the use of neural dampener technology, Sethrin continued. It will render them docile without causing harm. A merciful solution. The neural dampeners were the Collective's greatest peacekeeping tool. They projected a field that calmed the neural activity of any organic brain, reducing aggression to zero. No species had ever resisted them. Sir, Velnash said carefully, I don't think you understand what we're dealing with. The humans are not like other species. All species respond to the dampeners, Sethrin said with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong. Deploy them around the colony. We'll have this resolved within the hour. Velnash watched from his ship as the dampener satellites moved into position. Each one was the size of a small building, powered by zero-point energy. Together they created an invisible dome over the human colony. Activating neural dampeners, the technician announced. The field spread out like a wave, invisible but detectable on their sensors. It covered the entire colony and the surrounding area. Every human within 50 miles should have become peaceful, calm, unable to even think about violence. For 30 seconds, Nothing happened. The sensors showed the humans had stopped moving. Belnash began to hope that maybe finally this nightmare would end peacefully. Then the screaming started. It came over every radio frequency at once. Hundreds of human voices screaming in pain, but it wasn't random screaming. It had a rhythm, a pattern. They're doing it on purpose, the sensor officer said, his voice filled with horror. They're triggering seizures in their own brains. The neural activity is overloading the dampeners. Belnash watched the impossible happen. The humans were using their own suffering as a weapon. They were deliberately causing themselves brain damage to create feedback in the dampener field. Shut them down, Admiral Sethrin ordered, but it was too late. The dampener satellites began to spark and fail. The humans had turned their own neural activity into an electromagnetic pulse. One by one, the million-credit satellites died, their circuits fried by human willpower and pain. How? Sethrin asked, his voice small. How is this possible? Before anyone could answer, new signals appeared on the sensors. The humans were launching something from underground. Not ships or missiles, but small pods, each one just big enough for a single person. Those are medical evacuation pods, Kaleth said. They're not weapons, but Belnash knew better now. Everything humans touched became a weapon. The pods accelerated toward the Etherian fleet, using chemical rockets that burned so hot they left trails of ionized gas. They weren't trying to escape. They were on attack vectors. Sir, I'm reading massive electromagnetic signatures from those pods, the tactical officer reported. They've turned their medical scanners into... I don't know what. The first pod reached the nearest Etherian cruiser. Instead of impacting, it detonated 50 meters from the hull. But it wasn't an explosion of fire and shrapnel. It was an explosion of pure electromagnetic energy, generated by overloading medical MRI machines. The cruiser's shields flickered and died. Its lights went out. It began to drift, completely disabled. They weaponized medical equipment, Dr. Yellen said from her station. Those are magnetic resonance imagers. They turned healing tools into weapons. More pods reached the fleet. Some carried overloading MRI machines. Others had X-ray machines modified to produce lethal radiation bursts. One pod opened to reveal a human in a modified medical exoskeleton, usually used to help paralyzed people walk. But this one had been altered. Its servo motors overclocked to give inhuman strength. The human launched himself at an Etherian shuttle, punching through the hull with mechanical fists. He died instantly in the vacuum of space, but not before planting something inside the shuttle. Seconds later, the shuttle exploded from within. Pull back, Admiral Sethrin ordered. All ships pull back. But the humans weren't done. On the planet's surface, Belnash watched something that made him question the sanity of the entire species. The Colonial Medical Center's doors opened. Doctors and nurses emerged, but they weren't evacuating. They were performing surgery on volunteers in the open air. They were installing crude cybernetic implants, replacing hands with weapons, eyes with targeting systems. They worked without anesthesia, and the volunteers never even flinched. They're modifying themselves, Dr. Yellen reported, her voice shaking. They're turning themselves into weapons. That's not possible. The pain alone should kill them. They're using combat drugs, Belnash said. Massive doses. It will destroy their organs in hours, but they don't care. One modified human stood up from the operating table. Half his skull had been replaced with metal plating. One arm was now a crude projectile weapon made from mining equipment. He shouldn't have been able to stand, much less fight. But he ran toward the Etherian landing zones, others like him following. Admiral Sethrin's fleet began using their energy weapons, trying to stop the modified humans from reaching their ground forces. But for everyone they stopped, 2 more emerged from the medical center. Sir, Torvin reported from the planet's surface. They're not just coming from the medical center. Every building with medical equipment has become a modification site. They're using veterinary tools, dental equipment, even maintenance shops. They're turning their entire population into weapons. The fighting on the ground was worse than before. The modified humans felt no pain, showed no fear. They ran through energy beams that should have vaporized them, their cybernetic parts somehow dispersing the energy. When they reached the Etherian forces, they self-destructed, using overloading power cells from their modifications as bombs. I'm reading something else, the sensor officer said. The humans who triggered the seizures earlier, the ones who survived, their brain activity has changed. The neural damage has removed their ability to feel fear or empathy. They've deliberately given themselves brain damage to become better killers. Admiral Sethrin stood frozen on his bridge. In 500 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. They're mutilating themselves. They're destroying their own minds and bodies just to fight us. Sir, a communication officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the colony. The screen lit up with the image of a human woman. Half her face was covered in blood. One eye had been replaced with a crude optical sensor. She was wearing a medical coat over military armor. I am Colonel Dr. Sarah Chen, she said. I was the chief medical officer for this colony. Now I am the combat modification coordinator. You tried to pacify us. We showed you that humans cannot be pacified. We can only be stopped by killing every last one of us. And even then we'll make sure you pay for each death. She held up something in her remaining human hand. It was a vial of something green. This is a modified virus based on our common cold. We've altered it to target your species specifically. It won't kill you, but it will make you wish it did. Every human on this planet has been infected. If you land troops, if you take prisoners, if you even breathe the same air as us, you'll carry it back to your ships. That's biological warfare, Admiral Sethrin said. It's been banned for... We don't care about your bans, Dr. Chen interrupted. We care about winning. You wanted to see human warfare. This is it. We will use every tool, every weapon, every part of ourselves to defeat you. We will turn our bodies, our minds, our diseases into weapons. We will fight you with our dying breaths and make weapons from our corpses. The transmission cut off. The bridge was silent except for the sound of the tactical alerts as more human pods launched from the surface. Sir, Velnash said quietly, we need to leave. Now. Admiral Sethrin looked at him, and for the first time in centuries, Velnash saw fear in the ancient admiral's eyes. How do we fight something like this? Sethrin asked. We don't, Velnash replied. We run, and we hope they don't follow. Another alarm sounded. The humans had started launching their dead in pods, bodies filled with explosives and diseases. They were using their own deceased as biological missiles. All ships emergency withdrawal, Admiral Sethrin ordered, his voice hollow. Maximum speed. Don't stop for anything. As the Etherian fleet fled, Velnash watched the sensor data. The humans continued their modifications. They continued launching their pods. They continued screaming their war songs over the radio. And worst of all, they started broadcasting coordinates. The location of Earth, the locations of other human colonies, a message in hundreds of languages that all said the same thing. Velnash stood in the secure briefing room aboard the Etherian command station. The walls displayed human military documents that his intelligence team had managed to decrypt. What he read made his previous discoveries seem almost innocent by comparison. The document was titled The Void, Doctrine, Strategic Framework for Interstellar Warfare. It was humanity's plan for fighting in space, and it was nothing like the Etherian way of war. They don't think like us, he explained to the gathered fleet commanders. We fight to disable ships, to capture them intact. We preserve life when possible. The humans have a different philosophy. He highlighted a section of the document. No quarters given in the void. No prisoners taken in vacuum. No survivors to carry the tale. Commander Lorith, one of the younger officers, spoke up. Surely that's just rhetoric. No species would actually... Her words were cut off by an alert. Long-range sensors had detected something approaching at incredible speed. It's a human ship, the sensor operator reported. Just one. A destroyer-class vessel. Admiral Sethrin, still shaken from the events at Kepler 442b, gave the order. Open communications. Perhaps they want to negotiate. The screen lit up with the image of a human captain. She was young, maybe 30 Earth years. Her uniform was simple, practical. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I am Captain Maria Rodriguez of the Earthship Inevitable. I'm here to deliver a message. We are willing to discuss terms, Admiral Sethrin began. No terms, Captain Rodriguez said. Just a message. You wanted to know about human warfare. Let me teach you about the Void Doctrine. She held up a small device. This destroyer mass is about 8,000 tons. We've removed everything unnecessary. Life support, escape pods, even the food. We've filled every spare space with antimatter and deuterium. My crew of volunteers and I have turned this ship into the largest kinetic weapon you've ever seen. The Etherian officers looked at each other in confusion. Then understanding dawned, followed immediately by horror. You're going to ram us? Admiral Sethrin asked. That's suicide. That's the first lesson of the Void Doctrine. Rodriguez replied. Every ship is a weapon. Every crew is ammunition. We've calculated that at night,